Hi again, guys. I don't think I can necessarily tell you that I've solved the problem of amateur squad management here on Football Manager, but I have learned a couple of things here over the past off season, which was very long and very time consuming. The biggest thing that I learned is that this idea that we tend to have in certain countries that we're not going to be able to find any good players here, and that all the players are going to hate big matches and are going to be inconsistent, and all this other stuff is actually not true. So I'll give you a look at exactly what it is that's happened here and how I completely redesigned and reformed our squad. So when we look over here at transfers, there's a kind of a glitch here in Football Manager, which is that if you bring guys in and then you release them, the game will not show them as transfer activity out here on your transfer history, even though there is activity out. As you can see, we brought in a whole ton of players. We brought in many players this season, and we brought in a lot of players last season, not quite as many. And then the season before, we also brought in quite a few players. You'll notice these little yellow boxes that I have next to a couple of names. We'll look at some of them. Let's look at Roy Ledoux, a player who you may remember from last season. I put a little yellow box there because I created a note. There are three things that I'm looking for. It's guys who don't like playing in big matches, guys who have injury proneness, and guys who are inconsistent. What I do here is I go into history and I go over to create note and create the note. And I look over here at notes and look, inconsistent and doesn't like big matches. Now, it's not telling me right now that he's inconsistent because we're losing our knowledge of this player because of the internal fog of war. But disliking big matches is enough for me to say I'm not sure about this because we play a lot of big matches. We want to have players who actually enjoy playing in big matches, not a whole bunch of guys who don't. It can be difficult to figure out which player is which. There's something you can take advantage of in the amateur world, which is the fact that you can get players on your squad without paying any money for them at all. And because you can do that, because you can go and hire players and have them come on your squad and then figure out everything about them that your coaches or that the scouts would take like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to figure out, you can kind of cycle through players, figure out who you want to get and who you don't. So there's some guys where I did that. So for example, Jaya Sione, we took a quick look at him, brought him in for a very little bit of time, saw that he was inconsistent despite the fact that he was fairly professional, and just got rid of him, right? And so what it shows here is that, yeah, we released him on a free as soon as we got him in, and then Lionheart took him up. We play Lionheart in our next match, and it'll probably tell me that, oh yeah, Jaya Sione is looking forward to playing against me again or something like that, despite the fact that he was actually on the squad for like a couple of hours maybe before I said, no, this guy's just simply not good enough. It's kind of a little trick that you can use to get past the scouting requirements and look at these players. Now, if you're playing on a professional or semi-pro squad, it's not going to work quite the same because you've got to actually like look at the players and you have to pay money for them. This would work there theoretically if you had infinite money, but you normally don't. You have to worry about how you're paying money and budgeting, and that's where you really have to spend the time going through and looking at players and making sure you can tell which ones are good and which ones are not. We saw Rynel Krishna in our most recent match, right? He dislikes big matches. He is consistent, though, very consistent, and is a balanced personality, but his dislike of big matches is the reason why I took him on for a second and then got rid of him right away. And the overview, they only give him a C+ or C-. This doesn't really matter that much to me, honestly, because I don't have that much trust in our scouting team. So that's sort of what my opinion of this is. And you can go through, you can find a whole bunch of guys who are like this. There are players who are actually really good players who have some problems in their game that you'll discover over time. That means that you might not want to have them long term. Here's another one, Chris Famuana. So Chris Famuana has is actually not a awful player. Let's see here. He's not a player who I would consider to be like, completely horrible. But he is a player who dislikes those big matches and who is also inconsistent, and we saw that in his time with us, right? He did have 9 goals, 1 assist, and 10 appearances and had a 7.5 average rating. What you can't see here, though, is what his actual game-by-game form was like for us. Now, if you go back and watch older videos, you'll see that, and you'll see that, yeah, this guy played okay from time to time, but he had some problems, and there would be numerous matches where I would put him in, and he wouldn't do anything at all, and end up with like a 6.3 rating, and then we'd end up losing. Right, that's the thing that we're trying to fight against. And so as a result, what I've ended up with here in the squad is the squad full of players playing at every position who do not have these problems with being inconsistent or with being disliking big matches or anything like that. Now, some of them are not maybe as good as they probably should be. Some of these guys like Elama Fatonu, who's one of the most reputable players in the squad probably are not quite good enough to play for us. He's 30 years old, right? But it's okay. He likes big matches. He's doesn't have a horrible personality, and we can use him playing in that attacking right midfielder position. We can use players like that who might be a little bit older and might not be the best guys in the world. This guy as well, PanSa Maele, 28 years old, and is a new gen. He's a model citizen. And he relishes playing in big matches, but he just does not have the skill level to do well for the club. But you know what? It doesn't really matter that much to me as long as we have him on the squad and we can use that model citizen trait that might help us overall. In terms of the dynamics, of course, anytime you do a lot of transfers, you're going to have some dynamic problems. But as you can see, the problems are not huge, right? We have really good team cohesion despite the fact that I completely overhauled the squad in the offseason. The club atmosphere is doing okay. It's down a little bit, not quite sure what that's about. And my managerial support is pretty good. We have a ready set hierarchy where, interestingly enough, Tonu ends up being the influential player. And we're going to wait a little bit to see if a New Sila or this Kaleopa can wind up being some of the more highly influential or even team leaders on the squad. It will come over time. But you can see, look at this guy, Robert Kaleopa. He's a leader personality, a natural leader, and he loves big matches and he's consistent. I mean, this is exactly the sort of player that we want to see. We want to build the squad around players who are like this. He might not have the best potential in the world, but it doesn't really matter that much to me. I don't care only about potential. I want to also make sure that we have a good squad so that we can accent and complement the really good players that we have. Anyway, that's what the plan is. The nice thing about this, again, is that you can do this without spending any money on players. And when you're on an amateur team, you can literally get every single player that you want and use hiring players as your scouting system. So there's a little bit of advice for you, and I'll talk with you tomorrow. Bye.